takes about 24 hours to get it all compressed. So once again, my name is Mark. I'm with GovDirections. We're here today to talk to you about infrastructure. It's been a long time coming. There's been some significant investments in American infrastructure. I just heard a good history of that all the way back to Jefferson, whenever he first, President Jefferson, and investment into the Erie Canal and others. But here we are. We just saw last week a bipartisan initiative, $1.2 trillion, the largest investment in transportation ever in the history of the United States. And so it's a significant amount of money. It's important for everybody to help understand that. And I think in the broadband number, we'll talk about in just a few minutes, some $100 million minimum being sent to our rural areas in every state. Just a quick, I saw a summary. There's 110 billion to repair and rebuild roads and bridges, where the focus will be on resilience, equity, and safety projects that are there. There's also some $65 billion that's been set aside total for broadband, with every state guaranteed a minimum of 100 million, where that's going to be focused on not only where internet's not currently provided, but also to help lower the cost of internet. I think if you're in specific areas, specific communities, that it's so expensive to bring in broadband and bring in internet that oftentimes that creates a barrier. So there's going to be a renewed emphasis on that. In addition, we're seeing, as I mentioned earlier, the largest investment in public transit. This is going to be used primarily to reinvest in the deficient transit vehicles, replacing those vehicles, including new buses and new other types of vans and so forth in various communities, not just in metropolitan communities, but also in our rural areas where we're using vans and so forth to move residents and who are not able to have disability issues. These are going with clean zero emission vehicles and to make sure we improve the accessibility in those vehicles. In addition, we're looking at $66 billion to eliminate the Amtrak maintenance backlog, where there's Amtrak systems in place in the primarily Northeast and with this corridor, but other places across the United States. And then the expansion of that. I think if you've seen some of the maps of possible expansion, is certainly exciting, and specifically some of the southern areas. I know from where we're at in Atlanta, looking at the corridor between Atlanta and the coast, and then all the way up to, I think, Nashville, and then over in the other direction going into Charlotte. So it's big investments in our public transit there. And then a $7.5 billion investment in the electric vehicle charger stations, putting those across the United States. And that's a huge investment. If you go, I know I do a little travel in the West and seeing the vehicle charger just about every hotel station now. It's impressive, and this was going to dramatically expand those charging systems and have that readily available. We're also looking at, they're seeing 55 billion going into clean water, and also to eliminate lead service lines to make the system safer, and but generally just update those water systems across the United States. And then we looked at some $65 billion to upgrade the power infrastructure. I think we saw what happened that last year in Texas, and how vulnerable we can be in various parts of the country in the power infrastructure. And this would include thousands of miles of new resilient transmission lines to making them withstand disaster. So we're not constantly replacing. The deal also included some $50 billion to make communities more resilient to the impacts of climate change. And added into that, there was a cyber tax. I think we saw the problem with gas prices still in place right now because of the cyber attacks on the system and not being prepared for that. But now this enhancement going more just climate change, but also in cyber attack areas. And then in the climate change, they're dealing primarily with some of the areas along our coastal cities and who were impacted more heavily than others, and making sure they can withstand the influx of climate-related activities in those communities. And then they're seeing 21 billion specifically for the Superfund site, the brownfield sites. I know in my own personal community where I was at, there's two specific Superfund sites that can be potentially addressed by this. And And so making those communities more safe. And also reclaiming abandoned mines and capped orphan gas wells. These are economic and environmentally concerns, and so in various parts of the country, and they're meant to address that. And then finally, this to I am going to question about PowerPoint. I'm not going to use a PowerPoint. I'm reading some details to you, but we're going to show you exactly where this is at. This is really kind of a summary of what's happening. But I'm going to give the information to you that we'll have available to you just a minute here. Then finally, there's $42 billion to address repair and maintenance backlogs and to reduce congestion and bottlenecks related to the supply chain breakdown, and making sure that we can address the situation in the future. I think we've seen the impact here more recently, but preparedness is a big part of any final infrastructure package. And that's just some of this sort of a summary of what we were looking at. And at Gov Directions, one way that we're going to help make sure we identify these projects, and it's a lot of us, sometimes we think we see the federal government's talking about this and they're all there taking credit now, but most of these projects will be issued through a state or local government agency. These are the cities and the counties and the schools and the hospital authorities and port authorities and transit systems that are out there. Each of those going in and potentially even matching, so we can see the expansion of what we're looking at in terms of a 1.2 trillion. Whenever they come in and potentially say, if you got funds ready to go, then we can match those funds and have more of an impact. So quickly escalating the total volume of impact. And I mentioned earlier in our conversation of the email that we sent out, we're not only just talking about the actual hardcore roads and bridges, traditional thinking, but whenever we're looking at the funding at the local government level, we're looking at the whole, everything, the 360 view of everything that goes along with that, including making sure that the money is spent correctly. There's a significant emphasis on that fact, and seeing some of the things that worked from the Recovery Act, and then 2009, 2010, and then again in 2015 in time. And they had various programs going forward and making sure that that's in place. Their accounting services, auditing. So we have to think more globally, and then even all the way to the Zoom calls, and helping make sure that local governments can reach their audience and communicate effectively the projects that are out there through advanced technologies and audio media that is necessary in order to make sure they are spending these funds properly. So we want you thinking bigger than just the traditional infrastructure categories. So at Gov Directions, when you come into our individual categorization in the places that we classify, not only we classify with the traditional NAICS code, the North American Industry Classification System, but we're also come in with more common sense categorizations of projects. And so we will see there then the consulting and equipment. And then our infrastructure, we've added specific categories over the last year as we've prepared for the coming infrastructure week. As like, it was never going to get here, but here it is. It's here to finally today. And so they're signing that bill, and those funds are going to start going out. But we look at the more traditional bridge, roads, and airports and rails transit systems, but we're also recently added the broadband category. That is, the investment in broadband I think I saw someone speak about Arizona with their $100 million, and that's significantly more than all the other past investments in broadband in that state. And I think you're seeing that in some of the other states too. And then we're looking at the climate change, environmental remediation, and solar, and expansion of solar related activities. And then we're demolition, excavation, because whenever we go in and we actually build new things, sometimes we're removing what's already there and improving that. The general construction, the construction management risk categories, looking at marine port dredging. There we're seeing significant investments in our ports. I think even today is like in our Savannah port, some 8 million flowing already from this infrastructure bill to deal with some of the backlog that's there, and trying to make sure that they can move traffic in our ports, which is the highest ever just this past week, faster and get that information and those products moving quickly. I think it's important to our economic recovery. And then materials in general, the things that go along with those roads and bridges: aggregates, asphalt, concrete, rocks, sand, salt, and so forth. And then, going in, and then the final parts of that in terms of painting and striping roads, moving into the infrastructure. We're looking at park, pool, playground, stadium constructions. And oftentimes whenever communities can, if they've got a big project that's eligible for funding through the infrastructure bill, then they can take their assets they already have pledged and potentially move those to other items that are also important in the community. So we can see that compounding impact from this bill. We're looking at tolls and ticketing systems, and helping move the transportation and help replenish those funds in various communities, and making sure that's in place. General patching, milling, seal coating. I think that where the president started just a few minutes ago, they made clear that that's a big part, making sure that those roads are working. It's already there. It's not always completely new things, but the ones that are already currently there, making sure that they're up to their task. And then, of course, the project management, planning and scheduling, big part of all of this activity. Before a project is going to be potentially funded, they're going to make sure that plan is solidly in place. I think I looked earlier and I Googled, I didn't Google, I mean, I went and searched the keyword planning in the bill, which is some 2,470 pages long. Planning is probably the most popular word that I could find. It's just, that's the emphasis on making sure that these funds are expended properly. And I think that's a testament to that bipartisan approach that they took and dealing with that. And we're also looking at sidewalks, pathways, trails are a big part of this legislation, and especially in the West, and also in some of our urban areas, as we move past the more traditional transportation back to allowing individuals to move in different ways and different forms of transportation next in the near future. And then signalization and then everything that goes along with that as they're going through and building new projects, looking at the barricades and the barrels, the posts, the poles, all the items that go along with new construction. And then finally, and somebody mentioned this earlier, the definition of infrastructure has changed the way we've sort of been taught in our own heads, that some of them don't even know that infrastructure really is meant for water and sewer and power and gas and the utility structure. But fully understanding that this is a broad political answer to a number of different questions that our citizens of the United States have asked, and they've come back with this investment warrant. And I'm, as I mentioned earlier, we stay out of the politics, but I think it's having it come together in a bipartisan way, and it speaks volumes to what's really necessary. And I did see a statistic just a few minutes ago that said that this coming year will be the first time that our country actually spends more in infrastructure to prepare for the future than China does in the last 20 years. And so it's a competitive process, and making sure, like what we're seeing right now with some of the backlogs with supply chain related issues, that we don't find ourselves in that situation, 20 years from now. And so that's there. But so I always call attention to here, find that popular category, and don't forget into the other areas that we're looking at, potentially the consulting projects, diversity, inclusion, education, training, all the way back going into IT, media, audio, visual, to help address. So looking at other categories where those funds will start flowing as well. Marketing, advertising, helping to get the message out, especially when it comes to broadband expansion, and making sure community members know that those funds will be soon available. But any of these, as you pull through and you open up, we're focused primarily when you look at infrastructure, the larger projects, multi-year projects, and then you're able to quickly open that detail up. And then see more about that project moving all the way to get to the original source. Okay, so showing you how quickly that can come to you every single day. Now, what I like to do whenever I give a session is call attention to where you can go and get the original information. And this, I think, is oftentimes important for us to see things and read things ourselves. So we can start out with at whitehouse.gov. And here's a breakdown of what the initial bill was proposed. And you can go in and, at the course of that, the White House is going to be somewhat inclusive of some political spinning, and that's to be expected at any time. yeah, the political organization telling the story, but this is where the information flows at to start with, and seeing the focus of the legislation itself, from clean water to high-speed internet, and seeing those details. But what I found myself doing next is then actually going to the actual resolution. And you can see here, this is HR 3684. The bill actually started in the Senate. It was developed by a bipartisan group of 5 Republicans and 5 Democrats who came together and worked with the Problem Solvers Caucus in the House to come up with this bill that they all eventually agreed on. It started out a little bit larger, but as you know, they call it sausage making for a reason. It packed it into a smaller little bill that is now only 2,470 pages long. But you can step through it, and you can see all the individual sections. And I'm gonna let you see this in the bigger font here. So as you look at the bill, and there's gonna be a title, and it's going to talk about the topics. But you can come in, and I would point out that this has just now been really released. There's been different versions of the final. And there, once the bill's signed today, there will be another version that's released. You know, people can make hay about that, but it's just because it moves quickly, and wording is important, and making sure it gets done correctly in a proper way. It's important, and so that's why you see these different versions. And they'll talk about that in the legislative body that they're in, and they'll have the different. They'll give you initially a summary, and then they'll give you a text of it. They'll give you every version of it as it has passed through. And so this one's had 6 different versions. They also talk about each action. A lot of times there's going to be individual actions. So something could be attached to it. There could be an amendment. There could be different types of roll call votes that potentially fail, but they want you to see all of that. And then any amendments here, there's 539 amendments that were proposed on this particular bill. But always going back to the original final version as passed version. And it'll tell you that in the final documents there. Whenever you look at the different here, so here is the reported when it's first introduced, all the way to the enrolled bill, which is with the final where it's at this current place. The next one will be the one signed by the president. But you can see that the bigger text there, and you can go through and catch your, what I always find helpful at this point when you're dealing with a large legislative package is going in and doing some keyword functionality. And so I can go in and just do a quick scan of words of planning. I can go through those 30 matches of planning right now, transportation plan. So if I'm a planner, I might want to start there. Or if I was, mapping, there's mapping, significant amounts of money for earth mapping and national geological mapping. Mapping is a big part of this project. There's going to be funds available for that. And so you can jump forward and learn which section that you want to pay particular attention to as you step into the actual bill and then the text of the bill. And see here, and as you can, as I point out to you earlier, if I scroll down very quickly, we'll be at page 2738, I think is what I saw just about 30 minutes ago, whenever I got to this point, which I just got a hold of this actual bill, 2,739 pages. So that means there's a lot of appropriations here individually. And what it will do in each section, they'll give you how the funds will actually flow. So if it's an emergency management bill, potentially through FEMA, and then on into, so if I was looking at emergency relief, or I might want to look at the keyword resilience. This is, meaning how do we recover from a disaster? I think I could spell that right. Oh my goodness. SCIENT. Okay. Nope. Okay. Oh well. You know what the word I mean. I can't spell it right now. The resiliency or disaster, or even coming in sustainability. So if you got different areas that you are interested in, then you can very quickly go through a keyword search and pull those out. But the Sustainable Manufacturing Initiative is a big part of this, and then other parts of that, and the resiliency, and making sure that you can, if you when you're thinking about proposing and going forward projects, using some of these buzzwords in your proposals and you're writing your proposals, I think always speaks well to show that you've done your homework, and knowing that there's not just the big projects, but also the smaller projects that are out there. Somebody asked earlier about machinist work, and is a project like, is it worth listening to something like this? Well, steel is going to be a significant part of this. Knowing where these projects are at, being in there as a subcontractor with some big primes is a really good way to not have to do all the heavy work to gain the necessary, all the big contract, but then become, just basically right along with the right primes to and routinely, and you just stay in business, stay with new business, and to the point that you're actually having to potentially turn away business. And so that's a good place to be in with a bill like this, because the subs make up a big part in each of these, specifically for the larger ones. Larger projects and larger infrastructure projects, they're almost always going to require a significant portion to go to a subcontractor, either most likely small business standards. And so you want to watch for those, and they speak to that, some of those requirements in the actual legislation here, but then it also will give them the ability to provide new rules and new regulations to have that in place. Not to say that's always done, but it's occasionally, and making sure that you're aware of that and how that process works. Most of that is always, of course, going to refer back to when the actual bill, when the actual appropriation is then given to a community, and then they're actually issuing an RFP for you to respond to, and that then they'll speak to the rules and regs. FAR is a federal acquisition regulation. I always like to point that out to clients as they come in. And so you can go to acquisition.gov, and in the actual document that they release, they'll speak to FAR, and you can quickly just pop onto it. And if it has to do with FAR 12, it will say FAR 12. And if it's FAR 12.2, you can just step right in here and see that very straightforward, easy to read, understand language that will help guide you in how they're actually going to procure that item. Federal government contractors should be aware of FAR, any kind of federal project. And this could be most likely Corps of Engineer projects for this particular purpose, FEMA, Department of Transportation, Department of Interior. They will not, they're not going to move from the way FAR is interpreted for these particular projects. And so it's important that you understand that. And then whenever they step in and actually procure at the local government level, and at a certain level, then they may be required to speak to particular regulations that exist within the FAR, and then they'll explain those in the actual RFP for you that's there. Oftentimes, though, they'll just pass a portion of the funds down to a state, and then expect the state to implement that in their own rules and regulations. You should be aware of those in your own communities as you go forward. Another big place that I watch, and we're still waiting for the final cost estimate for this particular piece of legislation, but it is the Congressional Budget Office, cbo.gov. And when you come to the CBO, you can go in, you can actually do a Google search. But here's the releasing a cost estimate for the next piece of legislation they're looking at passing this coming week. But the one speaking specifically to the Infrastructure Act is 3684. You can go in, and I've already pulled this out, but you can go in, you can search, and you can browse all publications, but one by one. I can just drop in the key word 3684, and then it's going to come up and give me that the actual cost estimate. And this one particularly is going to be the individual amendments, and they'll ask for these pieces of these are nonpartisan reports. This is an organization that's set up by the Congress to provide factual information, and then they'll tell you exactly how the funds are going to be spent according to the way the legislation is written, and then how that money would eventually flow, so that individual congressperson can then give that information specifically to their constituents, and that's what it's used for. But here, of course, $287 billion for the highway administration, so they'll break it down for you. And we're still going through this. This information has not been completely released on this particular bill. There's been the past, and there's various sections that you can pull together and combine together, so the data is out there. This is not in one single document at this point that we can just say here, link directly to it so you can see the final. It will be here any day. They take pride in this organization just produces some of the best documents I think that exist in terms of how we spend our money as a government. And so I'll always refer back to it, but you count on it so that they take their time to make sure it's done correctly. But whenever that's out, we actually at GovDirections will write a blog. And so with GovDirections, when we point to you, this to you, you can go to govdirections.com/blog. And this will be built within the individual categories of industry that we're working with, and we'll link back to these individual documents. And here we will go in and break it down and show you and give you a report on how to actually how much funds are there and how they're made available to you, focusing on the actual projects that are there. Once again, staying away from the political side of it. So if there's specific funds that are available for, let's just pull out one of these, preparation of community vaccination centers was one of the recent ones. Then there we're going to, if you're in, if you're looking at tent rental, or you're looking at furniture rental, or even furniture sales or laboratory sales, then we're going to drive you, we'll break down that $7.5 billion appropriation, and we're going to provide the information to you at GovDirections, most likely with the terminology of upcoming. These are all pulled together, search for upcoming opportunities if the RFP hasn't been issued yet. Okay, so the funds are coming. We know they're coming. They're going to be in this community about this particular time. Okay, so here's one for funding, for here's an example for grounds maintenance. There's been money appropriated for that. The bid's just not out yet. Okay, the RFP is not out yet. It's still in a traditional business development cycle where if you're in this particular industry, then you can go in and potentially provide your collateral to that organization to help them understand how they can potentially hire you, why you're different, making sure that you have your capability statement in place to do that. Okay, this capability statement is that one-page document that speaks to your NAICS codes, it speaks to your core competencies, it speaks to your mission, your executive summary, it speaks to your certifications that you might have, if any, and then some of your past performance. That government can then pick up your name and your information and then potentially reach out to you directly. So here you're seeing already some dockside, dock availability, dry dock projects. These are all coming. We know have been now funded in FY 2022, and the funds are coming to you, and those projects coming to you soon. Get in there now. Start your traditional business development. If you are a company by yourself, what I've always encouraged you to do is go ahead and have an RFP that is sort of designed for you, sort of a sample one that you might even provide in government. So if you're doing IT cybersecurity, here is what you're looking for whenever you want to hire me. Have that RFP ready to go, or the scope of summary, scope of your services, so that you can help that organization understand what they really are looking to purchase from you. And I think that always sends a strong signal that you're ready to go and you're ready to win. Going back, final here, what I want to do is encourage you to continue to watch us. We're going to continue to have reports issued as the individual money starts flowing and governments start seeing projects on the streets, and they have those. They'll talk about it in a public meeting of some sort. The agenda of that meeting, we have individuals trained to read and call through that in order to make you aware of who's thinking about doing what. And whether or not some of these funds come down directly from a grant of some sort, which they will in various parts of it, various parts of the community. It's a 5-year expenditure process, but meant to get into the communities quick. But they will probably go through grant cycle. We'll be watching for those grant applications. We'll be watching for those projects that meet the criteria. There will be listings, believe us, politicians like to brag about what they're doing. So we'll be picking up on that information in order to tell you where those funds are going to be expended. And I want to encourage you to continue to watch us. We've now opened up a new Instagram account to kind of show visually some of these projects, the fiber optic network expansion. Some of these you'll quickly see turn into bigger projects. Maybe they have a smaller project in the community, and with additional funding, they'll be able to go in and expand that project. So we're looking at some of those. But even before the funds actually start hitting the street, we've seen what was somewhat of a backlog in infrastructure spending pick up. And this coming year was already going to be the largest spending period in our history for local and state government. And now it's going to be supplemented with additional funds to kind of help escalate that process. And so I'm going to stop there. I'm actually going to stop the recording at this point, and see if anybody has any questions they want to ask me. The process itself, details. If you want to, you just raise your hand and I'll call on you. Or if you want to type a question into the chat box, you just click on chat and type question here, and I'll be glad to try to answer your questions. Or in a particular industry that you're in that you want to ask me about, I'll be glad to. So I'm going to stop that recording now. And thank you everybody for attending.